In the exam, you're often asked to critique products or evaluate products and to be discussing how products can be improved or modified. So this video is designed to assist you in evaluating products so that you can make informed decisions as to how good or bad they are and what their issues are or what their positives and negatives are effectively, and also how you can define what is required of a product for it to be considered an iconic design or iconic design. Now, if you've been studying design technology for a while, it's very likely that if you are annotating a product or evaluating a product, you will have heard about the structure A.C.C.E.S.S.F.M. Okay, so this is an acronym that basically breaks down a range of factors that you need to consider when you are designing a product, but also these factors can be used to write a specification and indeed to evaluate a product as well. So the factors are as follows. A is for aesthetics, so the looks of the product. C, cost, which is either the cost to the user or the cost for manufacturer, taking into account labour and parts and so on and so forth. How suitable it is for the consumer. The safety factors present in the design. The size of the product and also indeed its proportions. The function, which obviously brings in factors about ergonomics as well, about how easy, safe and comfortable the product is to use. And obviously the materials and manufacture used. Now, if we've got a question where we have to evaluate a product or decide whether a product we deem to be a good design or a bad design, we can literally go down this list of A.C.C.E.S.S.F.M and talk about all of the factors and how well it meets these factors. So, does it look good? Is it an effective price or a suitable price? Does it meet the consumer's needs that it's aimed at? Is it a safe product? Is it a suitable size, or does the size affect its aesthetics in some way? Does it function according to its use, and is it an ergonomic product? And obviously, are the materials and the manufacturing processes chosen suitable to make the product effective in this way? So that's a way we can obviously evaluate a product. But as I said, if we're designing a product, we should be considering these factors to make sure that we're designing and considering everything, I suppose. But also, if we're writing a specification as well, we could start with these criteria if we're going to specify what a design should or shouldn't be. Now, around about the 50s, there was a designer called d&tdtchat, and he had a very distinct set of principles which he deemed would be typical of a good design. And these were as follows. A good design should be useful, as in it should function well. Again, we can see the similarities between this and A.C.C.E.S.S.F.M. A good design should be unobtrusive. Now, this is a slightly controversial one because unobtrusive means it sits back, it blends in with the background, I suppose. It doesn't overtly present itself to us. Now, there's many products that are not considered unobtrusive. However, they are still seen to be very popular products. But d&tdtchat was obviously a clear modernist, and his idea was a product's form should be dictated by its function, and it shouldn't have any additional detail which could make it more complicated to use, for example. So in his mind, good design is unobtrusive. You or many other designers might have a slightly different stance on this. Now, moving on, a good design should be understandable. Now, this relates to product semantics. I like to define this by the example of doors. Okay, quite often, you might have experienced this yourself. You'll come up to a set of doors and you'll push the left side door and it doesn't open. And you'll push the right side door. Again, it doesn't open. You'll then go to pull the left side door and again, it doesn't open. And finally, you'll pull the right side door and it finally opens. Now this is just an example of bad semantics or how a design might not be understandable. If we are to push something, normally we might have a push pad with an arrow on it indicating to push it. If we're going to pull something, it's more than likely to have a handle on it. But quite often, in this example, we might have handles that we're supposed to push or doors that are perhaps locked when it's not particularly clear that they should be locked. So good design, in his opinion, should be understandable. I happen to agree with him on this particular case. Now, good design should be honest. Now, I like to use this in terms of the British Arts and Crafts quote of truth to materials, as in a product should look as it's made. Now, if I'm to make a product and it looks like it's made of wood, then it should be honest. It should be made of wood. It shouldn't be perhaps coated with a thin laminate that is printed to look like wood or printed to look like stone. We'd have a stone table, for example. So good design is honest in this sense. Another example I like to use of maybe dishonest design, I suppose, in this particular case, is, for example, in the clothing industry, where you might have a shirt that has things that look like they're pockets on it, but they're not pockets. They're just meant to look like a pocket. Now, this, again, it might improve the aesthetics. You might have a real opinion over whether this is another example of good design just for its aesthetic principles, and it helps to balance the shirt out. But again, in Dieter Ramsay's mind, he was a modernist, and he felt that good design should be honest in that sense. You should do what it appears to do. Now, obviously, then moving on to aesthetics, again, it's on A.C.C.E.S.S.F.M, so we're concerned with the looks of the product. We want to make beautiful products, okay? In terms of Raymond Lowy, to paraphrase one of his quotes, if two products were the same in terms of the cost and function, we'd probably pick the one that looks the better. So obviously aesthetics is always going to be important, and in fact we're often balancing two key areas as designers, and that is form, which is the looks of the product, and function, which is what it does. Moving on, good design should be thorough. So every aspect of a design should be considered, and quite often, I'm guilty myself of doing this in my early days, but I only generally consider the sort of front and the side, or maybe the top of the product, okay? Quite often the back and the parts that the bottom perhaps of the design, you don't consider quite as thoroughly as you would the other parts, but arguably every part is just as important as the last. If it's not thoroughly designed, then you've obviously missed something off, probably as the designer. And again, I concur with Dieter Ramsay's principle here that good design should be thorough. He also states that good design should be environmental, and by this we are considering obviously sustainability and the use of recycled materials and preserving energy and things like this, which again I think it's something that should be in the mind of all good designers. He says good design should be lasting, so it should last the test of time. And again, this is another aspect of modernism. So if we design in a way where design can be considered timeless or almost without style, particular style of a period or a fashion, then it will last the test of the time in that sense. Again, we can have very different opinions on this. Some people feel the latest thing out in the latest colour is important, and obviously fashion and clothing is very susceptible to change, and something which might be fashionable 10 years ago will not be fashionable now, and things often go in cycles of 20 or 30 years where something falls out and comes back into favour. But in the terms of good products, in Dieter Ramsay's mind, a good design will last. I could buy a chair, for example, in the 1920s, and it should still suit today's environment as much as it did back then. Moving on, good design should be innovative, so it should do something that is improving upon what might have happened in the past. And finally, a good design should be sparing. And once again, this is another thing that ties into the idea of modernism and form following function, as in design should only have enough to make it do what it needs to do in an effective way. If we're adding on additional detail, it can then become problematic. You might have seen JML and the Betterware catalogue, where you'll have a product that does lots and lots of things. In his mind, this would probably be a bad product because it's trying to do too many things at once, and it's not a sparing design. So I'd say Dieter Rams was a strong advocate for an appliance as opposed to something that does everything. Now, again, so we talked about evaluating products. We talked about how we can consider something to be good, or perhaps even move to the status of becoming iconic. And in Dieter Ramsay's mind, he had 10 principles there, which again I often use with my students to make good design, okay? If I think about all of these criteria, I'm likely to make good, but in this case, modern products. Now, this is a long list, but again, we can remember it by this short sentence at the bottom. You, and you hate lists. Bit of a strange one, I know, but you, and you obviously stands for useful, unobtrusive, and understandable. And then the letters in hate and lists stand for the other letters there. Okay, so if you can remember that little sentence, you can hopefully remember some, if not all of these principles. And again, we can use these to annotate designs. We can use them when we're developing a design specification. And most importantly for this question, we can use them to evaluate how good or bad a product is. Now, finally, this was about evaluation and about deciding what is considered good design. And often good design moves on to become iconic design, as in something that has been around for ages and is still considered good. Many of the principles of what Dieter Rams is talking about here, okay? But in this example, I've tried to break iconic design down into 5 key criteria. And I'd say an iconic design should set a standard. It should set a benchmark that every other product should follow. And you'll find this in many products. Let's take the iPhone, for example. The iPhone came out and it had a standard interface. It has a certain aesthetic style. and it was seen to be very successful. Quite soon after the iPhone, there was a lot of other Me Too companies, which I've talked about in previous videos, that have tried to copy that style because it sets that standard, it sets that benchmark. In addition to this, iconic design should last. Again, this is another criteria on Dieter Rams' list of good design, but here I think iconic design lasts the test of time. In the picture there, we've got the example of the classic Mini, and this is considered still to be a car. It does what it's supposed to do. It's still around. It's a classic. And indeed, they've since brought out new versions of the Mini, but still keeping the classic aesthetics. It's still recognisable as a product. In addition to this, good design should be innovative. Again, on Dieter Rams' 10 principles of good design, it should do something that is not done in the past, or it does it in a new and better way. Iconic design should be memorable. So at quick glance, we can look at this product and we can recognise it very quickly and we can remember it straight after. We'd only need to see the classic Mini there, or a Volkswagen Beetle, for example, once, and it's got such a unique style about it, it will be very memorable and easily recognisable if we want to see it again. And finally, and this is the difficult one, iconic design would be excellent in one or many different criteria. Now, I'm very biased in this sense, and I tend to believe in many of, if not all, of Dieter Rams' 10 principles of good design, and therefore for a design to be excellent, it would meet all or many of those 10 principles of good design, and also the designer is clearly concerned with all of the aspects of A.C.C.E.S.S.F.M, aesthetics, cost, the consumer in mind, whether it's safe or not, the size and proportion of the product, function, and the materials and the manufacturing methods made to use the product. So it's a little bit biased, but effectively this should hopefully give you some structures in order for you to annotate designs, create a design specification, and in the case of this question, at AS and often A2 as well, how to answer questions relating to evaluation and actually whether you decide whether a product is good, iconic, or actually there's some issues with it.